My name is Steve Joo. I'm the chef and owner of Joodooboo in Oakland, California. Today, I'll be turning these soybeans into dubu. Dubu is the Korean word for tofu. The history of dubu goes back at least a couple thousand years. It's a highly valued and important food item, and not just some plant-based protein cube in the way that it is unfortunately sometimes perceived. Dubu making is very simple. All you need is soybeans and water and the coagulant. The first thing I'm going to do is wash and soak the soybeans. The soybeans that I use are organic, non-GMO soybeans. These are from Illinois, I believe. Sometimes they come from Minnesota. The soybeans are soaked overnight, a minimum of 8 to 12 hours. After soaking, they double in volume. Now the soybeans are soaked, we'll take them to the grinder to make soy milk. This is a machine that I imported from Korea. It serves two main functions. First, it grinds the soybeans and produces soy milk, and then it boils and cooks the soy milk using steam. So this is the grinding component of the machine. It mimics a traditional Korean grinder or mortar. The grinders being made of stone, allowing them to be ground cold, essentially, retains all of the flavor and nutrients of the soybeans. After setting up the grinder, I put on the hopper, place the beans inside. I use 5 kilograms of soybeans. I came across this dubu maker in Korea during a year I was studying Korean food in Korea. When I tried his dubu for the first time, it was remarkable because of its flavor and consistency. And I thought that it was remarkable enough that I begged him to teach me and take me on as an apprentice. Now that the beans are in the hopper, I open the water spigot and turn on the grinder to start producing milk. Water being one of the 3 ingredients in dubu is very important, so I use a filtration system that produces water that I think is delicious and tasty and doesn't add any undesirable flavors or smells to the end product. I tested 4 or 5 different filtration systems, and the one we're using is the one that gives me the kind of cleanest but still, it's a weird thing to say, but flavorful water. I like to use the wooden paddle to look at the consistency. I want the soy milk to have a consistency sort of like half and half. I adjust the amount of water that's flowing into the hopper to reach the desired consistency that I want. The soy milk is landing in the steam kettle, which is where the soy milk is eventually cooked. This is a byproduct of the dubu making process. It's the pulp and the hulls from the soybeans. I'll probably give the soy pulp to a neighbor who has chickens or a Taiwanese chef friend of mine who makes a delicious pickle after fermenting the pulp. Now that I've made the soy milk, it's time to filter it. 1 5-kilogram soybean batch produces roughly 40 liters of soy milk. 40 liters of the soy milk with the consistency that I'm going for produces 32 pounds of dubu. In order to filter it one more time, I extract the soy milk into Cambro containers. Here, I'll turn on the steam to help push out all the soy milk. I found that using the soy milk that is filtered through just the machine process ends up with a dubu that has a little bit of mealiness to it, not quite as silky as I would like, so I like to pass it through a nut bag filter one more time after. There's a lot of pressing involved as opposed to squeezing that just helps push it through a little bit more efficiently. That is probably the most physical part of this process. You could definitely get a really good upper body workout. The soy milk's been strained out. Now it's time to cook. The kettle injects high-pressured steam into the soy milk. The thermostat is reading 66 degrees. I want to bring the soy milk up to a 94, 95 degree point for it to reach a happy boil. Using steam as the heating mechanism for cooking the soy milk is really key because it allows me a certain amount of control and consistency for each batch. The steam eliminates the risk of burning the soy milk and introducing unwanted flavors that cooking in a pot on a stove would be very susceptible to. Most folks use like a food-grade silicone as a defoamer, but for my purposes, my scale, I just manually skim it all off the top.
There's this nostalgic aroma from alleyways in Korea with Joodooboo shops, and soy milk smells green and vegetal when it's raw. And once it's cooked, it has that nostalgic sweet and savory smell. That's what I look for.
Sometimes there's a skin that forms on the top of the soy milk, and just to make sure that I don't have any unwanted particles, I filter it one more time through a chinois. I stir the soy milk around to make sure that I'm reading true temperature. Now I need to chill down the soy milk before adding in the coagulant. Once it goes into ice bath, I wait for it to reach somewhere in between 70 to 75 degrees Celsius. The soy milk has cooled down enough, so now it's time to add the coagulant. Coagulating at a higher temperature would allow the process to go a little faster, but it would result in a tighter curd that would make firmer or harder Joodooboo. I like this one even though it takes a little extra time for the softness and fluffiness of the curds. Before I coagulate, I'm just going to remove any last remaining foam. Flow is super important. The overall movement of the soy milk, once it begins, you want to keep it as steady as you can to give the curds the best chance of forming and shaping up nicely. As they start to form, there's a certain amount of playfulness for sure in how I start to interact with them, how I kind of speak to them in my head. The coagulant is reconstituted seawater. It's a combination of magnesium chloride and sea salt and water made to mimic ocean water to an extent. At this stage, I like to say something silly to the curds, something like, let's go swimming, to encourage them to come to the top. I like to feel like I'm in cooperation with the curds. That engagement, that conversation, that personality, for me, it comes out when the curds start to form. In this stage of stirring, there's a movement that's a little bit more rapid. It's less of like pushing the curds with the front of the paddle. It's more trying to pull them up to the surface. What I'm looking for is the right number of curds swimming at the top of the surface. Once the curds are formed, they need 18 to 20 minutes to set before we can scoop them out. After the curds have set for about 20 minutes, they're in their Joodooboo state. Joodooboo means pure Joodooboo in their unmolded state. Typically, it's scooped out as it is and used in soups and stews. The top layer of the set curds are going to be the softest and fluffiest. And if you've ever been to a Korean restaurant and had Joodooboo jjigae, this is what they would use to make that. The shaping of the Joodooboo is really important for this particular technique. The cloth that I use holds all the curds and lets the whey seep out. The mold has 2 tiers, so I'll scoop enough curds to fill it to the top. It'll shrink to about half its size and volume, which is when the top part of the molds can be removed. In this process of molding, the 2 important parts are shaping and releasing the whey to allow it to form into a nice block. The set curds initially have about a 50% moisture or whey content, so separating that out from the curds themselves is an important step. Reshaping and tightening the cloth around the block is an important process. One thing that sets this technique apart is that it utilizes gravity as opposed to pressing, and that has a big impact on the final consistency and density of Joodooboo. Using gravity in this way allows the Joodooboo to maintain a creamy consistency, but also allows it to set with a certain amount of density, maybe a little bit more substantial than a soft tofu that you would get from the store. This is a mold that a friend of mine made for me using Japanese cedar. I like it a lot because it imparts a really beautiful aroma to the Joodooboo. I'll rewrap and reshape the Joodooboo about 4 or 5 times. This takes about 30 minutes to a pretty specific level of jiggle. And now I'm gonna invert the Joodooboo onto a cutting board. Even though the Joodooboo is pretty soft and jiggly, it's substantial and dense enough to withstand the weight of this cutting board. This is the finished molded block of Joodooboo. I love this knife. It's made by one of the few or only remaining blacksmiths in Korea. This is close to the size of Joodooboo that we sell in the shop. In this cross section, you can see the curds are nice and even. There isn't too much variability from top to bottom, so this is a nicely formed block. I'll show you simple ways you can prepare this Joodooboo at home. One thing that I really love about Joodooboo is that in this case it's delicious on its own, but it is such a great springboard and support for any of your favorite flavors. This is really simple. I'm gonna make a couple slices of Joodooboo, drape it with some sauce, and garnish with a few nice herbs and leaves. Now I'm gonna make a Joodooboo soup. I'll place a slice of Joodooboo in a bowl, a little spoonful of charred greens that were seasoned with a touch of sesame oil and fish sauce. Scatter a few blanched vegetables around. Gets a crack of pepper. Ladle of hot broth. That's my take on a traditional Korean dipping sauce. Drizzle of sesame oil. And some nice herbs to finish. Clean, light, nourishing, warm. The Joodooboo kind of gives weight and substance to the overall composition. I think that any craftsperson has a relationship with the process or the product that they make. They're engaging in a relationship with themselves and the parts of themselves that are resonant in the process. There is a certain amount of subtle and low-key drama that is Joodooboo making that, for better and for worse, are things that I identify within myself.